What would you do if the man you trusted like a son turned out to be the one holding the knife? On the 15th of March, 44 BC, 60 Roman senators answered that question, and soon after, the most powerful man in the world was lying dead on the Senate floor. This is the story of Julius Caesar, the man who conquered half of Europe, tore up every rule Rome had, and never saw the knives coming until it was far too late. You have to understand what Rome was back then. In the 1st century BC, it wasn't an empire, it was a republic, and it was proud of it. No kings, no crowns, no single man in charge. That was the whole point. For almost 500 years, that had been the one unbreakable rule. And Caesar wasn't born above that rule. He clawed his way up through debt, scandal, and raw ambition until he cut a secret deal with two other dangerous men, Pompey, Rome's greatest general, and Crassus, the richest man alive, 3 men quietly carving up a republic between them. It was never going to hold. Caesar took his share and marched it into Gaul, modern-day France. Year after year, he ground through the tribes there one after another until a whole region that had never bowed to anyone bowed to Rome. The cost was staggering. Historians think the Gallic Wars killed or enslaved more than 1 million people, so take your pick. Caesar was either the finest general Rome ever produced or one of the most efficient butchers in human history. Honestly, he was both. The war peaked at a hill fort called Alesia in 52 BC. Caesar trapped the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix inside, then built 2 full rings of walls around him, one facing in to keep him caged, one facing out to hold off the army coming to save him. It worked. Vercingetorix surrendered. Gaul was finished. Caesar came home a hero, which was exactly the problem. A general with that kind of loyalty from his soldiers and that kind of love from the crowd does not stay just a general for very long. The Senate knew it, and the Senate was scared. So in 49 BC, they gave him an order. Disband your army. Come home alone. Caesar had a better idea. He marched his legions up to a little border river called the Rubicon and crossed it. In that one step, he declared war on his own government. It plunged Rome into civil war, and Caesar won it, battle after battle, year after year, until every rival he had was dead, exiled, or on their knees in front of him. So the Senate started handing him honors, one after another, until finally they handed him something no Roman had ever truly held before: dictator for life. But here's what people forget. He wasn't just a warlord. He rebuilt half the city. He threw enormous public games. He made sure grain reached over 100,000 of Rome's poorest every single month. That's the part they leave out. The people didn't just fear Caesar, they adored him. His statues went up right next to the statues of the gods. An entire month got renamed after him, the one you still call July. Right now, today, to the soldiers and the poor, he was a savior. But to the Senate, sitting in their marble hall, he was starting to look like something they'd sworn to destroy. A king. And then came the moment that broke it open. At a public festival, Caesar's own friend Mark Antony stepped forward and offered him a golden crown, right there in front of everyone. Caesar pushed it away. Not once, 3 times. The crowd roared with approval every time. But a few senators watching weren't relieved. They didn't see a man refusing a crown. They saw a man rehearsing. Because Rome had a very old, very deep fear of kings. 5 centuries earlier, they had thrown their last one out and sworn, never again. And now, there was Caesar, wearing royal purple, sitting on a golden chair. To some of those senators, it didn't look like an honor anymore. It looked like the thing their ancestors had died to prevent. And Caesar, to be fair, did nothing to calm them down. He compared himself openly to Alexander the Great. He waved away the old Senate traditions, yet they were beneath him. He even stopped standing up when senators walked in. Small things, but small things send a very loud message. One senator heard that message loud and clear. Gaius Cassius Longinus, sharp, bitter, and completely convinced that Caesar had to die before he ever put that crown on for real. But Cassius understood something. If the plot was just angry men who hated Caesar, it would look like jealousy. It would look like murder. He needed it to look like justice. And for that, he needed one specific name, a name that ordinary Romans actually trusted. He needed Brutus. 'Cause Marcus Junius Brutus wasn't just another senator in a toga. His own ancestor had helped throw out Rome's last king 500 years before. Brutus carried that like a weight around his neck his whole life. He came from the family that had ended tyranny once already, and everyone knew it. But here's the twist that makes this whole thing hurt. Caesar loved Brutus. During the Civil War, Brutus had actually fought against him and lost, and Caesar didn't have him killed. He pardoned him, then promoted him, then kept him close, and treated him almost like a son. So when Cassius first came to him, whispering about daggers, Brutus said no, and when Cassius pushed, he said it again. No, over and over, he would not do it. But Cassius didn't stop. Little notes started showing up on Brutus's chair in the Senate. Anonymous, unsigned, quiet reminders. Someone somewhere was leaning on him a little harder every single day, whispering the same thing. Remember whose blood you carry. And in the end, it wasn't hatred that turned Brutus. It was fear. The fear that his friend, the man who'd spared his life, had become the exact thing Rome had spent 500 years trying to stop. So Brutus said yes, and with his name, the plot finally became real. There was one more reason it had to be now. Caesar was days away from leaving Rome, marching east on a massive campaign against Parthia. If the conspirators waited, he'd be gone for years, buried inside a wall of loyal legions, completely untouchable. It was now or it was never. They called themselves the Liberators, 60 senators, maybe more, all of them sworn to absolute secrecy. In a city that ran on gossip, that is basically impossible, and sure enough, the warning started leaking out. A soothsayer reportedly stopped Caesar in the street and told him to beware the Ides of March, the 15th day of the month. Caesar just shrugged. He'd survived a dozen wars. He wasn't about to lose sleep over a fortune teller. The night before, his wife Calpurnia woke up shaking from a nightmare. She'd seen him dead, bleeding in her arms. She begged him not to go, and for a moment, Caesar actually listened. But then one of the conspirators showed up at his door, Decimus Brutus, a different Brutus, and another man Caesar trusted. He'd come to personally walk him to the Senate, and he told Caesar the truth would look pathetic. The most powerful man in Rome, hiding at home because his wife had a bad dream, so Caesar got up, and he got dressed. On the way there, a man pushed a scroll into his hand. Some sources say it laid out the entire plot, every name, every detail. Caesar took it, he tucked it away, and he never read a word of it. He was running late for the Senate. And the Senate wasn't even in its usual hall that day. It was meeting inside the Theater of Pompey, named for the rival Caesar had crushed years before. So Caesar walked in to die in a building named after the last man he destroyed. Even the room was an omen. He took his seat, and a senator named Tullius Cimber came up to him with a petition begging for his exiled brother to be pardoned. A completely normal request, except it wasn't a request at all. It was the signal. Cimber grabbed Caesar's toga and yanked it down off his shoulder, baring his neck, trapping his arms. Caesar shouted that this was violence, and that was the moment. The first blade came down. A senator named Casca struck first, a clumsy, glancing cut to the neck. And Caesar fought. He spun around, grabbed at the blade with his bare hands, even drove his own writing stylus into Casca's arm. For one single second, he must have thought he could get out of this. He couldn't. The rest of them closed in. 60 men, one target, and nowhere left to turn that didn't already have enough waiting for it. Cassius! Cassius! A dozen more, blades coming from every side at once. And then Caesar looked up and saw Brutus, stepping forward, dagger in his hand. Now forget the famous line, "Et tu, Brute?" That's Shakespeare. Historians aren't even sure Caesar said anything at all. Some of the oldest sources say he just went quiet, that when he saw Brutus among them, he simply pulled his toga up over his own face and stopped fighting. In the end, they stabbed him 23 times. And here's the grim irony. Doctors of the day thought only one of those wounds was actually fatal on its own. Julius Caesar, conqueror of Gaul, dictator of Rome, master of the known world, bled out on the floor at the foot of a statue of Pompey, the rival he'd beaten, watching him die. For one heartbeat, the Senate was dead silent. And then it exploded. Senators who'd had nothing to do with the plot, who didn't even know it was coming, went scrambling for the doors, absolutely certain they were next. The killers ran too, but not away. They ran toward the Capitoline Hill, holding up their bloody daggers, shouting that they'd done it. They'd freed Rome. Liberty, they called it, and they honestly expected the city to cheer. It didn't. Because down in the streets, an ordinary Roman looking up at those men on the hill didn't see liberators. He saw a mob of rich senators who'd just murdered the one man who'd ever actually done anything for him. And a few days later, at the funeral, that anger found a voice. Mark Antony, Caesar's friend and co-consul, stood up over the body and gave a speech. He read out Caesar's will. Money left to the ordinary people, gardens left to the public for everyone. And by the time Antony finished speaking, the crowd wasn't grieving anymore. It was out for blood. That same night, the mob burned down the Senate house itself, and the liberators, the men who thought they were rescuing the Republic, had to run for their lives out of the very city they claimed to have saved. Caesar's will had one last surprise buried in it. He hadn't left his name to Mark Antony, his closest ally. He'd left it to his teenage great-nephew, a quiet, sickly, unremarkable boy named Octavian, a kid nobody in Rome took seriously for a second. That was a mistake, a big one. Because what came next wasn't peace, it was more war. Years of it. Mark Antony and young Octavian buried their own bitter rivalry just long enough to do one thing together, hunt every last conspirator down. And they didn't stop at the assassins. Antony and Octavian drew up lists, names of enemies, marked for death with rewards for anyone who'd do the killing. Hundreds of names, and a lot of them had nothing to do with Caesar at all. They were just old scores, finally getting settled in blood. Take Cicero, Rome's greatest orator. He wasn't even in the conspiracy, but he cheered Caesar's death out loud, and he'd made an enemy of Antony along the way, and that was enough. They ran him down and killed him. Then they nailed his head up in the Forum, in the exact place he'd once given the greatest speeches of his life. Brutus and Cassius made their last stand at a place called Philippi in Greece 2 years after the murder, and when the battle finally turned against them, neither man would let himself be captured. Both of them chose to die by their own hand instead. So think about what actually happened here. The men who killed Caesar to save the Republic ended up destroying it completely. Within a few short years, that quiet, underestimated boy, Octavian, stood alone as the first emperor of Rome. He took a new name, Augustus. The kingship the liberators feared so badly, it came anyway. It just walked in wearing a different word. And here's the part that really stings. Augustus ruled for more than 40 years, and he gave Rome something it hadn't felt in generations: real peace, actual stability. But it cost them the one thing they'd killed to protect. The Republic was gone, and no one ever got it back. As for that warning, beware the Ides of March, it outlived every single person in this story. 2,000 years later, you still hear it, half as a joke, every time the middle of March rolls around. Rome only forgot to listen to it once, and we've never quite been able to forget it since. And people still can't agree on Brutus. Some call him a traitor, plain and simple, a man who put a knife in his own friend. Others call him the last honest man in Rome, someone who chose a principle over the person he loved most in the world and lost absolutely everything for it. And maybe that's the real lesson, buried under all 23 of those wounds. Power almost never falls to a stranger or an enemy at the gate. It falls to the people standing closest to you, the ones you trusted enough to turn your back on. And the deepest betrayals, they were almost never really about hate. They were about fear. Fear of what the people we love might one day become.